One of the most common complaints from nearly every segment of the New Zealand economy is that the Resource Management Act, our not so beloved RMA, is cumbersome, costly, and time consuming. The RMA dates from 1991, and, well, let's just say it's seriously showing its age. In spite of a fair amount of tinkering, there's been 18 RMA Amendment Acts through 2020. The poor old act really needs to be retired. Now, I'm not going to go into any real detail on the problems with the RMA here, though. This take is about an attempt to address some of these issues without a complete rewrite of the Act. Welcome to Sustainability Takes New Zealand, a YouTube channel created primarily for New Zealanders to highlight news, events, developments, plans, and ideas related to all things sustainable. In this take, we'll be talking about the Fast Track Approval Bill currently working its way through Parliament. First, let's agree that something needs to be done about the RMA approval process. A 2021 analysis by the Infrastructure Commission concluded that a total RMA compliance cost for infrastructure projects were about $1.3 billion annually. And in the previous 5 years, application processing time had increased fivefold. To put a dollar figure on that delay, a medium complexity project would incur direct consenting costs of about $4,000 per day while an application is being considered. And that's just for a particular range of infrastructure projects, not everything that passes through the approval process. These delays are generally seen to act as barriers to development and result in poor environmental outcomes. And then there's the small matter of scope. The RMA was written at a time when our comprehension of sustainability was quite narrow. The focus was almost exclusively on the environment, and much of the discussion was around pollution, contamination, and preservation. The Brundtland Report had only come out a couple of years earlier, and the idea of economic growth driving positive outcomes was not widely accepted. Sustainable development, the SDGs, and the Three Pillars conceptualization were over a decade away. So on the one hand, full marks for taking a leadership position in this area. But times have changed, and we need a new, better informed, more comprehensive approach to the issues of sustainable growth and development while respecting our very special environment. The admittedly partial solution before us right now is the Fast Track Approvals Bill. This was submitted to Parliament in early 2024 and has rather quickly worked its way through the approval process. It's gone through the first reading, the Select Committee, a second reading, and now sits with the whole House. The final step, the third reading, should happen in early 2025, though no date has yet been set for that. But before we go into the bill in any detail, there's a bit of history. You see, this isn't the first time the RMA approval process has been altered. You'll recall, back in 2020, the country was struggling under the COVID-driven restrictions. Businesses were shut down and work on many major projects was halted. The government at the time implemented the COVID-19 Recovery Act, which allowed for fast-track consenting for infrastructure construction. Consenting was done by an expert consenting panel, and there were no environment court or appeal rights to the decision. Also, little or no public consultation or local approvals. Now, 3 categories of projects could be submitted. Cat 1 projects were specific shovel-ready government projects. Cat 2 were road and rail maintenance and upgrade projects. And Cat 3 projects were public and private as selected by the Minister for the Environment. Meant as a short-lived remedy for COVID-driven disruptions, the bill had a 2-year expiry date. Though not without some issues, the bill worked reasonably well. Quite a few useful projects were approved, and these no doubt helped the economic recovery from the pandemic. But the core problem with the RMA remained, and it was still seen as a significant hurdle for economic development. So the current government has introduced the Fast Track Approvals Bill to address the consenting process. It draws on the earlier COVID bill, but has some different drivers. It seeks to address 2 specific problems. Number 1, the time and cost associated with the current consenting process. And number 2, the insufficient value placed on economic and social benefits. The overall intent was to create a one-stop shop, fast-track consenting regime that would address both problems. A few highlights. As originally proposed, the Minister for the Environment would make the approval decision. Pretty much any project could be considered, including RMA-prohibited projects, and this process would override other relevant legislation. It's probably not a big surprise that there have been some objections, and quite a few groups, agencies, and individuals have made submissions during the consultation phase. Let's start with the point most everyone actually agrees with: the one-stop shop approach to consenting. Going through this fast-track process includes approvals under the Wildlife Act, Freshwater Fisheries Regulation, the Conservation Act, the Crown Minerals Act, the Public Works Act, the Fisheries Act, the Exclusive Economic Zone and Continental Shelf Act, and of course the RMA. In the existing process, these would be individual approval processes. The savings in cost and time for the proposed process are obvious and considerable. But during the consultation phase, there were several parts of the proposal that have not been as well received. Let's start with the actual decision-making. Concerns were raised that having a single minister make the decision left open risks due to influence and bias. The process has been revised to now have the minister recommend projects to an expert panel for the actual decision. There was also some concern that the original purpose focused exclusively on facilitating project delivery. It has been recommended that this be broadened to include appropriate sustainability objectives as well. One of the challenging complications was where this process would sit in the hierarchy of legislation. As proposed, this overrides quite a few other relevant acts. Many of these are scheduled for review, not the least of which is the actual RMA. The suggestion is this new legislation sit at the same level as other relevant legislation to allow independent analysis and structure. What some see as the biggest potential problem, this process should not be a way to circumvent or otherwise evade RMA requirements. As proposed, prohibited activities could be approved in the fast-track process. This is not a popular position. The old COVID-19 Recovery Act did not allow prohibitive activities, and this one really shouldn't either. Finally, there's a concern about several community and local aspects of the proposal. It's unclear how local input will be obtained, how treaty commitments will be considered, and the protection of conservation land. Now, the government has said they've taken on board all of the input as part of the consultation process, but we'll have to wait and see the final version of the bill in 2025. In the meantime, the Energy Minister, Simeon Brown, has wasted no time in touting some of the projects submitted to the fast-track process. In a recent press release, he talks about 22 renewable energy projects listed for fast-tracking. My original intent was to look at these projects individually and evaluate them on some scale of sustainability, but that wasn't going to work for two reasons. First, it would take approximately forever to actually do that. And second, the readily available information on these projects varies greatly. It simply wasn't going to be possible to do a fair and complete evaluation. So what we'll do is present an overall summary of what these proposals will actually be accomplishing, their apparent sustainability elements, and whether or not it looks like this new fast-track process is going to work. Of the 22 power projects, 10 are solar installations, 7 are wind farms, and 5 are hydro schemes. Now, just to be thorough, there's actually 2 grid-level infrastructure projects that are not generation, but are energy-related and part of the fast-track process. The numbers being put forward suggest a total generation increase of 30% if all these projects were ultimately developed. Now, spoiler alert, some might not be, and power estimates are not always accurate. Still, total power generation will increase using renewable approaches. Now, that's important. We're actually talking about a real increase in renewable production, not a replacement for existing non-renewable generation. To the extent that this allows older systems to be retired, that's an absolute win. But a considerable portion of this new generation will be used to satisfy actual demand, and older systems will thus remain. Further, 1 of the wind and 4 of the hydro schemes are either reconsenting or repowering existing installations. So while there might be some efficiency gains in the repowering scheme, these are essentially status quo, no new generation. Now, all of these obviously address the economic pillar. The vast majority of these schemes are being put forward by energy companies whose business it is to make money making power. And after all, the main goal of the fast track process is to more quickly advance commercial projects. The social pillar is quite a bit more problematic. Some of the projects have engaged pretty extensively with the local community. One, notably, is a partnership with the local iwi. But reporting this in this area is uneven. While one could argue providing more renewable power is a social good, some of the projects have possible downsides with respect to altering landscapes and perspectives. Most projects are given some effort to providing visual buffers for installations, and the wind farms are situated in pretty remote locations. Still, only partial marks for the social pillar. Last is the environmental pillar, and this is where it became very challenging to assess the proposals. Most did not publicly report any details on their environmental analysis. Realistically, the repowering and consenting proposals have already passed the old RMA tests, so we'll give those a pass. For the remainder, the superficial evidence is that efforts were made with some seemingly more thorough than others. Most addressed elements like shelter belts and replanting with natives to support local wildlife. Several also stressed the current, often degraded, status of the land, implying that the installation wouldn't make matters any worse than they already were. Most would be situated in close proximity to existing power infrastructure, which would mean minimal adverse impact resulting from connection. I do want to call out 3 projects, though, to give you a better idea of what's being proposed. The first is the Point Solar Farm in South Canterbury at the north end of Lake Benmore. This would be New Zealand's largest, at least for now, solar installation with a 420 megawatt peak capacity, enough to power about 100,000 homes. It's a project from Far North Solar Farm, who currently have 11 sites being developed around the country. This is the most complete application readily available, and it really does look like they've checked all the boxes in terms of the environmental elements. I find it interesting that their installations by design are agri-PV to at least some extent. They do allow for sheep to be grazed beneath and around the panels, though that's not an expressed part of their proposal. Nevertheless, some groups and individuals have registered concerns. The second project is the Waitaha Hydro Project. This is a joint project by West Power in partnership with the Putini Ngaitahu, the local iwi, and would provide power to about 12,000 homes. It's a run-of-the-river design which does not require a dam and effectively produces power 24/7. This is actually quite a mature proposal, having originated in 2005. It has previously been denied at the ministerial level on the basis of potential damage to recreational activities on the river. This new fast-track proposal has been enhanced to address these particular issues. Now, the third is not actually a generation project. It's an infrastructure upgrade designed to increase system reliability. Wellington is expected to experience a major earthquake at some point in the future. In an effort to mitigate any potential loss of services, the Wellington Lifelines Group has created the Regional Resilience Project. One of the several projects in their plan is to upgrade the Central Park substation. This project would basically split the existing 33 kV service through the substation into 2 distinct locations, thereby improving system resilience. Unlike essentially all of the generation projects, this is a straightforward urban construction project with very different scope for its impact. I would suggest this project has minimal environmental impact, some longer-term economic benefits, but considerable social impact. So, quite a variety of projects under this new proposed pathway. The 2 questions we'd like to answer are: how well do these reflect our current thinking on sustainable development, and how well does this process seem to be working? These are actually highly related. The degree to which environmental and social elements are properly considered is largely a function of the expectations of the expert panel. The post-consultation recommendation is that the expert panel be chaired by an environment court judge, either retired or current. Other panel members are unspecified at this point, but are likely to include local authorities and relevant iwi. The intent is to provide sufficient expertise in environmental, resource management, and social issues areas not explicitly addressed in the original draft legislation. Now, as for the relative success of the process, it's a bit presumptuous to judge this prior to actual passing of the legislation and an analysis of the resulting decisions. Now, that hasn't stopped some groups from calling this an absolute failure, but there's a distinct odor of politics in many of these objections. Personally, I'm looking forward to the revised proposal with a positive outlook. The degree to which interested parties have made substantive suggestions for improving the proposal is impressive. To give you a flavor for the effort people are putting into this, the Department of Conservation has made 341 distinct suggestions, and the Ministry of the Environment has chimed in with another 146. Of course, there's a bit of overlap between the various sets of recommendations, and not all will make it into the final version of the bill. But it seems to me this is the way the legislative process is supposed to work. Just a few comments to wrap this up. The creation of a one-stop shop for fast-tracking resource consent is generally well supported. This should result in reduced time, cost, and provide notable economic and social benefits. The goal of this particular approach, to put a greater emphasis on economic elements, is an attempt to balance the strong environmental focus of the RMA. While that is consistent with current thinking on sustainable development, balancing the three pillars is going to take quite a bit more than fast-tracking proposals. More than just the RMA needs attention. Coordinating the various elements, both legislatively and operationally, will be the key. Finally, the more this bill is revised, the more it looks like the COVID-19 recovery bill. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That very special purpose bill had some really good elements. Putting some of those into this new structure, along with incorporating the benefits of our experiences, makes good sense. Thank you for listening to the channel. I'll be posting more in the very near future, so please check back. I'm always looking for feedback, so please feel free to comment and hit the subscribe button. It's the clearest indication I have that viewers are appreciating what I have to offer. Thanks again.